Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I kind of sound like Don Pardo there a little bit. Live from the Blue Seats. Rather, it's not Live from the Blue Seats. It's Saturday Night Live. No, this is Live from the Blue Seats. This is producer JL coming at you with another solo podcast here during this very long and quiet summer for the New York Rangers. So we pretty much have gotten extensively into a lot of some of the things that have gone on this summer so far, whether it was the potential Capo Caco trade to open up cap space, allowing space for Brennan Othman, Brett Berard, obviously the Jacob Trouba thing, Barclay Goodrow getting bought out. I mean, you name it, we've covered it, but there really isn't much happening right now. This is July 25th. And outside of maybe Ryan Lindgren taking a puck during the Beauty League game, I mean, there really isn't much to go on right now. Obviously, they traded for Riley Smith too, and things just kind of seem to be a bit quiet. So obviously, when things happen, we'll have it for you not only on the blog but also on the podcast as well. The regulars, of course, are taking a break. It's the summer, and this is also being recorded after the Mets beat the Yankees. It's a Subway Series sweep. I am certainly very happy about that, being a Mets fan. But I guess this podcast will be more of sort of a retrospective today, because I submitted something for the website, which will be up soon, and it's involving one of the players that the Rangers acquired during the 2014 Stanley Cup run. Now, I know that many of the Ranger fans that are listening to this, including Ranger fans that are either my age or slightly older, or maybe slightly younger too, depending on what era you grew up in, really had this affinity for Ryan Callahan. Now, I liked Callahan. I really did. I thought Callahan was a superb Ranger. I loved his grit. I loved his scoring touch, where he was able to not only do it on the power play, but, just pretty much had a pretty sick shot as well. He was very gritty. He was, hard-nosed, blocking shots, solid defensively. And I really did like Callahan, as just a player. As a captain, I liked him a lot too. Seemed like a lot of the players seemed to have kind of navigated towards him. And this is no slight to Cali, by any means whatsoever, but just me as a fan, I just kind of never really took to him like many others did. I mean, that's not me saying that I don't appreciate everything that he's done. I mean, Callahan was awesome. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and discredit anything that he did, but it's just more or less like, I mean, yeah, it's cool. He was there, had skill, but a lot of people seem to really love him. And I just wasn't like that with him. I don't know why. I don't know. It just never really resonated with me. Like I said, I enjoyed watching him play. I loved him as a Ranger, but I just kind of had that affinity for other players. And one of those players was the guy that he was traded for, and Martin St. Louis. I had always liked Marty St. Louis, just as a player in general, being that he was, on the shorter side, but, he was just really good. And I remember, back when I was a kid in 2004, they'd have NHL on before on ESPN before Baseball Tonight, and I used to watch Baseball Tonight religiously. So before that, I would obviously watch the hockey game, and around that time was when the Lightning were in the playoffs, and you could see this little French Canadian man skate around with his yellow hockey stick and just potting him in the back of the net. And obviously, he was a tour de force for that 2004 Tampa Bay Lightning team, and I had always just taken to him. I just really liked his style, the superb skill, great speed, awesome passing. I mean, you're talking about all around, solid player. And Martin St. Louis, obviously, he's a Hall of Famer now, Um, so I was obviously excited when they traded for him. St. Louis had been trying to become a Ranger for quite some time. Excuse me. St. Louis had been trying to become a Ranger for quite some time. I think there was a rumor in 2009 that they were trying to get him. The Rangers were really trying to poach Tampa Bay at the time. Either Dan Boyle, Martin St. Louis. Obviously, both those guys ended up becoming Rangers, but it just ended up being a couple years too late. But in the case of St. Louis, um, his final 2 years as a Ranger, I mean, at least his first year in terms of the first go around when he was traded here was really, really good in terms of just his performance. Now, you look at the numbers of how many games he played and when he got traded here to what it would be in the playoffs. He only scored one goal here when he got traded, and it was against Vancouver. He had 7 assists. He had 8 points. He was only a +1. He had 4 PIMs, and he had one shorthanded goal, which was the one that he scored against Vancouver against, ironically enough, John Tortorella. But then, you flip the switch into the playoffs, and, he became a monster, really. In 25 games played in his first go around as a Ranger, he scored 8 goals with 7 assists. He was a -5, but he was able to score 6 even strength goals and 2 power play goals. He had 3 game winning goals. Obviously, one of those goals was the game winning goal against the Montreal Canadiens, which, I'll have a story about that in a second. But being that Martin St. Louis was one of the players I had really liked, I was incredibly ecstatic for him to be a Ranger. Now, I vividly remember waking up that morning of the trading deadline, or towards the trading deadline, and I just remember I was laying in bed. I didn't have to work until later that day, and I just remember getting up, and I didn't have to go to class that day either, which is weird in its own right. I guess it's just one of those days. And I turned on the TV, put on TSN, TSN Sports Center, or whether the not the free agent frenzy, but the trade deadline special they had. They used to show it on NBC back in the day, and so I essentially decided to just watch it. And then what ended up happening is I saw the news that Martin St. Louis was traded for Ryan Callahan, straight up, and I was happy. I was ecstatic. Like I said, um, somebody that I'd really wanted to be a Ranger for a very long time. And although it was at the expense of Ryan Callahan, and the interesting thing about the whole Callahan thing was I think the Rangers played Colorado before the trading deadline, and you could tell, Callahan had been battling a wrist injury, and you know you can tell he wasn't really meshing well with Alain Vigneault's system, and he was hurt a lot. I think he even sustained that's a wrist injury to I forget which wrist it was, but it was against Washington earlier that year. So he was battling a lot of injuries, and he wasn't really producing the way that he should have. And so he ended up, you could kind of tell the time was coming, and there were trade rumors going around that they were looking to try and do that. And obviously, Martin St. Louis was, probably looking for a change of scenery in Tampa Bay, which is even crazy to think about nowadays because of how good the Lightning are. Once they got past the whole LeCavalier, St. Louis, older player era, they really began to take off. Stamkos and Hedman and all those other guys ended up really coming through. I think Kucherov was around that time too. But it was just interesting to see him get traded, and obviously, just kind of have the impact that he had on the team. So, and the reason why I'm mentioning that again is because I have a piece coming out for the blog that involves one of the moments that we'll get to in a bit. But again, I was so happy that I knew that once I'd be able to, I would buy a Martin St. Louis jersey, which I ended up doing. I do have one. It's a Reebok. Um, and I was just really happy that we were able to get a guy like that. And as the regular season was ending, it took them a little bit to kind of adjust to the team. They were in a bit of some flux. They did have some, set lines, but then Vigneault finally settled on, the lines that would really end up meshing well. I think it was a Stepan, Nash, and Kreider. And then you had Pouliot, Zuccarello, and Broussard, which was insanely good. Then you had San Luis, Hagelin, and Richards, which pairing the two guys who won a Stanley Cup together, and then Carl Hagelin just absolutely killing it, is obviously one of the better decisions Alain Vigneault's made in his 10 years of Ranger. So though, although all three of those lines were just clicking at once, and it was just phenomenal. And then the fourth line was obviously a mix of Derek Dorsett, Dominic Moore, Brian Boyle, and Daniel Carcillo. Each the rotation between Carcillo and Dorsett got a pretty decent rotation. Derek Dorsett, I'll just say this before I go back on to St. Louis. Derek Dorsett, I really did like. He was one of those get into the corner, down and dirty kind of guys. A lot of people forget that we had Derek Dorsett. It just sucks what ended up happening to him in his career with his neck when he was at Vancouver. But I really did like Derek Dorsett. I kind of wish he was here a little bit longer. Daniel Carcillo, I also really did like too. That was, I think, another late trade that they had made. He had that nice goal against Philadelphia in the playoffs where he ended up going on the boards and all the fans were giving him the finger. It was fantastic. But that team was a well-oiled machine, and they ended up getting better with Brad Richards, basically becoming the de facto captain after the fact. But Martin St. Louis really began to take off. He had a couple of nice goals against the Flyers. And then what ended up really setting everything off was actually what the piece that I was going to write about was during the Penguin series. And obviously we all know what happened. Martin's mother, France, ended up passing away tragically from a heart attack. She was only 63. And obviously Marty went to go spend time with his family. And he went back to Montreal. And crazy enough, he ended up coming back. Everything was in flux. Everybody thought he wasn't going to be around, but he ended up coming back. And they said, the family said that Marty at least, I think, probably said that it's what his mother would have wanted. And obviously playing through something like that is tough, And one of the things that I mentioned in my article is that I'm really close with my own mother. And I'm blessed that I still have both my parents with me, and I will always cherish that, and I'll continue to cherish that. And, I don't take it for granted. I have lost family members, and I can only imagine the pain that a son is feeling for the loss of his mom. Like I just had my grandmother pass away a couple of months ago, and I just saw the way that it affected my mother. My grandfather from my father's side also passed away a couple of, about 2 years ago, and I saw what it did to my dad. And I've had a couple other family members who were older pass away, and it affected me. So I can only imagine what it is to lose a parent that you were really close to. And I know Marty was close with both his parents, and it's probably close to all his family too. So I can only imagine the pain that he was dealing with. And then to come back and play at a high level, it's a testament to the dude's strength and resiliency. And very classy by the Penguins to go and there was the famous clip on Hockey Night in Canada where Marty St. Louis was on the bike, and Sidney Crosby came to him, and I think a couple other Penguins players came to talk to him as well. And the team ended up really, I think I'm not sure if the whole team ended up going to the funeral. They might have, but the whole team rallied around Marty, and it was just a very difficult situation. And fast forward to the Rangers obviously beat the Penguins that one night, and then the game 6 was on Mother's Day, and this was in the midst of the Rangers coming back from being down 3-1, and everything just kind of came together. And I think what ended up coming to the point was when Marty ended up scoring on Mother's Day, where Stepan threw the puck on net, it bounced off of his shin and it went into the back of the net. And when I tell you that, I wasn't there, but watching it on TV, the Garden sounded like it went ballistic. And just from the moment itself when it happened, it's a special moment, obviously, because the guy scored on Mother's Day of all days, but it's also added fuel to the Rangers' comeback. Obviously, ended up winning the game 3-1 or 3-2, if I'm correct. And it just ended up adding fuel to the fire for that comeback. And obviously, Marty was moved by this, not only by the support of teammates, but just by all of us Ranger fans. I'd wish I'd been able to go to one of those games, because that would have been awesome. But, we all rallied behind, one of our own. And you could clearly see the team rallying behind him. There was a little bit an extra umph, you know, after that happened. Obviously they steamrolled Philadelphia. I don't want to say steamrolled, but they took them out in 7. That was a crazy round. And then being down against the Penguins, this happens, using that as a rally cry to not only rally around your teammate, but also just kind of put the extra gear into not only beating Pittsburgh, but then also going into the Montreal series. Now, the Montreal series, the interesting thing about that is um, it was always something where Henrik Lundqvist could never play well at the Bell Center for some reason. I just never understood it. Um, he was always, it was kind of like a house of horrors for the guy. It would always either be Marty Biron or Cam Talbot or some other backup, even before and after. Lundqvist would go in there and it would just not be his night. So that was one of the big concerns. Ooh, excuse me. That was one of the big concerns, that Lundqvist wasn't going to do well, but the Rangers came out flying those first 2 games. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a team get dismantled as much as the Rangers did to the Canadians in those first 2 games. And obviously, Marty even scored a couple goals during those first 2 games. And so um, after those first 2, that's when I kind of knew that they were going to take the series. I know, they ended up going 5, and there was a couple of games where they were a bit off. Obviously, they lost that one game, game 3, in overtime with Alex Galchenyuk when it went past the defender and he tipped it in. But the one that really stands out the most is game 4. And if I'm remembering this correctly, let me just double check. It had to have been game 4 because they won the series in 6, if I'm correct, because they almost dodged 7. Yeah, they won the game in 6. And I just remember game 5 was when they had the back and forth. Yeah, so it was game 4. Game 5 was the back and forth in Montreal, where they ended up coming back. It was like defense was optional in that game 5. Because I just remember they were down by like 3 or 4, ended up storming back, and then I think like Rene Bourque, if he was even on the team at the time, if I'm remembering that correctly, and like Alex Radulov, they just kind of took over, and it was just a mess. Was Radulov on that team? I'm not entirely, can't even really remember at this point. I think Radulov was on the Canadians in 17. I'm kind of mixing my players up, but I do know Rene Bourque was on that team. But anyways, so game 4 comes around. Now, interesting thing about game 4 was that this was June 2014. So just picture, if you ever seen what I've looked like, obviously I'm a quasi lanky, tallish Hispanic man who I've obviously filled out into my body since then. But I was this lanky 20-something-year-old. I had way more hair on my head, which I kind of miss. And I just remember at my job, I was in my office, and it was really only 2 people working in my department at the time. So I would work late, and I pulled the game up on a stream, and I was watching it in my office. I got a couple slices from this pizzeria across the street, and I decided to watch the game. And the stream that I had the CBC feed instead of the NBC feed. So while many of you were watching it on NBC, I was in my office. Obviously, I wasn't working. I had just finished work. And I had the CBC feed. So it was Jim Houston. And I just remember watching it very intently, staring at that computer, watching, the play unfold. And I just remember Hagelin took the puck away right over the blue line, and St. Louis was still in the zone. They found him open in the corner, and he had been challenging Tokarski all night. And for most of that series, when Tokarski came in, he tried to go glove side on many occasions, and Tokarski, to Dustin Tokarski's credit, played out of his mind after Carey Price got injured. I mean, I'm talking about keeping Montreal in it. And Marty St. Louis finally beat him. And what I ended up doing, I'm very bombastic when I celebrate goals, or like if it's a big goal, I'm very animated. If you've ever gone to a game with me, you'll know how I am. I'm not crazy, but I'm a fun time to go with at a hockey game. Um, I just remember once he scored that goal, I think I leapt up off my chair, started chanting, "Let's go!" And I ran in like a circle like a cartoon character. It was pretty fun. I got lightheaded because I was running around so fast, but I was so happy. This is the closest that I've seen my one of my teams get to a potential finals berth, whether it's the World Series, a Super Bowl, or a Stanley Cup final, or a World Series. The only other time that I really remember seeing my teams, I was too young for. I mean, I remember 2000 for the Mets. Um, Obviously, I wasn't around for '86. The Jets, forget it. Um, and the Rangers. I mean, they didn't really make the playoffs much when I was younger, up until I became like a teenager. So seeing that, it was just kind of like this experience, and I really did. Once he scored that goal, I really began to appreciate Martin St. Louis even more in the way that he played in those playoffs. He was a monster. I mean, it just meshed so well with him and Brad Richards and Carl Hagelin. I mean, just I don't know what it was, but he really began to endear to not only me but also many other Ranger fans as well. And then also, obviously touching back to the whole thing with his mother passing away and scoring on Mother's Day, is how can you not love that? I know Marty wasn't here for a very long time, and when he came back in his second season, he wasn't as good as he was before. Obviously, that was be his final year. He scored 21 goals in his last year in hockey. I mean, that's not bad, and he made it to the conference final. You know, and I'll add another story about Marty. So I didn't really get to go to many Ranger games at that time. My dad is not a Ranger fan. My dad's an Islander fan, actually. And so when it came to the Rangers, I was basically by myself. And at the time, I wasn't making a lot of money. I could barely go to Mets games at the time. I used to go to a lot with my dad back in the day to Shea Stadium. So that was the extent of my Met games, experience. And I didn't really start going to Met games consistently until 2015. So I didn't really go to a ball game after Shea was demolished. I didn't really go to a ball game from 2009 to 2014. So my first time at Citi Field was in 2014, and my first ever game at Madison Square Garden was February 22nd or 23rd, 2015. It was a Sunday night, and they were playing the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, this was in the midst of the President's Trophy season, and Cam Talbot was the starting goaltender because Lundqvist had gotten hurt about a week prior, or not too far before that, where they were going to the net against Carolina. Stick got pulled up into his mask. The neck protector got pulled up, and he got basically took a puck to the larynx, and he was out. It was amazing that he even finished that game to begin with. That's when Cam Talbot really began to take his hold. So it was Cam Talbot versus Curtis McElhenney. And I'll never forget, obviously when you go to a game and a player does something, especially if it's your first game, you really appreciate that player even more. And I'll never forget, Marty St. Louis scored 2 goals that night. I just see that little man with his yellow stick running around. Both were on really I think one was on a broken play. The other one was a nice shot. Kevin Hayes also scored that night. Rick Nash ended up winning the game in a shootout. So I really ended up getting my money's worth that night. And it was an experience. And I just remember singing the goal song for the first time. That was borderline cathartic, being around with everybody, just experiencing the New York Rangers Madison Square Garden experience for the first time. And Marty St. Louis made that really great for me because he scored 2 goals and he was really putting the team on his back that night. And I just kind of remember thinking like, damn, like I really like Marty St. Louis a lot, and that stuck with me because I like it when players I like score when I go to games. So even though that season didn't end the way that we wanted to, and Marty was awesome in that playoffs as well, but you can also kind of tell he was slowing down a little bit. 14, 15, you get 19 games played, you get 7 points, but he was all over the ice. But you can kind of tell he had lost a step a little bit in the playoffs that year. And then you take a look at his regular season numbers from that year. I think he scored 21 goals, if I'm correct. He scored 21 goals and 31 assists. He had 52 points. And he was a plus 12 in his final year as a Ranger, in his final year ever. I mean, that's still pretty good for a guy who was basically at the end of his rope. And so, even though he was only here for, you know, 93 games, he scored 22 goals, 38 assists. He had 60 points as a Ranger. I mean, he's not going to break any team leaderboards or team records, but um, I really did like Marty St. Louis a little bit more than Ryan Callahan. I don't know if that's blasphemous or whatever fans want to call it, but I really did like Marty St. Louis, and I really think that he, you know, for how long he was trying to become a Ranger before that, but when he finally was able to come here, he made an impact. I think the story was just right. Would I have loved to have seen Marty a little bit younger? Maybe take a couple of those Ranger teams in the mid, 2010s, take them, elevate them a little bit. They could have used it because it would have been really cool to have a guy like him next to Marian Gaborik, but um, obviously it didn't happen. Maybe they don't get Marian Gaborik if they have Martin St. Louis, you know. Maybe they build the team another way and they might actually have gone further in. Who knows? You could do a what if on that as much as you'd like. But we got him. We created a significant memory with him, in terms of just him, team going to the Stanley Cup final. Oh, that's another thing too. He scored a couple goals in the finals or in the final, especially in game 4 when the team was basically at the brink, was able to pop that one in past Jonathan Quick, which crazy to think he's our backup now. But I just really took to Marty, and he is one of my all-time favorite Rangers, and I know that there are many other Ranger fans who are similar to me who, really enjoyed, Marty here. Um, he's one of those guys that if I ever met him in person, I would, shake his hand. It kind of reminded me of what I said to Dominic Moore um, when I went to see Game 2 of the conference final. They were having a the typical, like, fan fest, but this time it was on a different side of MSG, but it was near one of the entrances anyways. So you had Brian Mullen and Dominic Moore. They both signed my shirt, of course. And when I went to talk to Dom, I said, Dom, I'm telling you right now, um when you scored that one goal against Montreal, I literally almost snapped my ankle celebrating. And it's true, I almost did snap my ankle celebrating Dominic Moore's goal. He couldn't have been nicer. I mean, Brian Mullen was great too. He was very kind. We talked about the San Jose Sharks uniforms, which was pretty cool. But just to the importance of that 14 run and emphasizing that to Dom, I would do the same thing to Marty St. Louis. Obviously, Marty is coaching for the Canadians now, and he's actually done a pretty good job, so to speak. I mean, that's essentially the job that he wanted. You know, almost became an assistant coach for the Rangers from just all the rumblings I heard. But Hockey Hall of Famer, and beloved by many in Rangerstown. And as it's, even though he was here for a short period of time, I think he is embedded in a lot of our memories. Because he was part of the team that last made it to the final. And those tend to stick around a little bit longer. Granted, they didn't win. LA was just that much better. But at the end of the day, you had a Hockey Hall of Famer play for your team. It's the same, you could kind of equate it similar to Gretzky when he was here, which I also have a couple videos about that if you want to check it out. Gretzky uh, was here for 3 years. First year, they made it to the conference final. Obviously, they didn't make it the final 2 years, but he was still pretty good, even though he only scored 8 goals in his final year. I mean, it's still Wayne Gretzky, for goodness sake, So he was one of those players that left an impact, and so was Marty St. Louis. And yeah, the Rangers have had many superstars on their teams over the years. I mean, Theo Fleury, Pavel Bure, Eric Lindros, Marcus Naslund, all those guys. Yeah, they were here, they were good, but few of them really were able to make a big impact on the team like Marty St. Louis did. So I just think, if you don't, I want to say if you don't appreciate them, then maybe you should try. But I'm sure many of my fellow Ranger folk fans will understand where I'm coming from. And so that's going to be really sort of the next article that I have for Blue Seat Blogs, is basically talking about the Mother's Day goal. Now, like I said, I'm very close to my mom, and I can't imagine the pain. So just him doing that at that moment just became really special, and I know we all rallied around him, and it's something that I'll never forget because I kind of related to myself in a way. And I know that there's many others who are listening who have lost a loved one and can understand, way more than I could at this current juncture. Knock on wood, none of our parents pass away anytime soon. But I'm just saying, there are others who have had that loss and understand the pain that Marty went through, and that's what all kind of connected us together. Our fandom of sports, losses in life, and just, rooting for the Rangers. That's what sports is all about, really. Just enjoying good moments and watching your team do well. If your team doesn't do well, sorry, but you know. But anyways, don't think there's really much more I can say about Marty St. Louis, except he's definitely, for one of the Rangers that has been here for a short period of time, he's definitely one of the more widely remembered ones because of what he did in such a small period of time. You know, it's just kind of one of those things that when you think about it, it didn't really last long, but you were there for a good time, not a long time, so to speak. And I'm just thinking about it now, and as I sit here in my room, I'm thinking about this, and I'm looking at the Pro Stock Warrior yellow stick that I ended up buying. I have one of the St. Louis model. I'm just thinking that he really did do a lot in his 1.5 season as a Ranger. And you sometimes you go to MSG, you still see his jersey around. I see actually sometimes I might see a little more St. Louis than I do Callahan at some points. Again, no diss to Ryan Callahan. I you know, I already went through that, but um I think people really connected with Marty, and definitely made for, pretty good. It's just weird, but it's cool at the same time. He was here for a short period of time. But anyways, so that's just my thoughts on that. Slow news day, not really much going on, but figure I'd tie this into something that I wrote for the blog. So this isn't going to really be a long podcast, but it's just to talk about it and kind of detail that. Figured I'd bring over some of, a little bit of what I did as an idea for the articles that I write into this podcast. And I tend to write a little bit more on the nostalgic side. Dave and the crew tend to really echo a lot of my thoughts when it comes to what's happening right now. Obviously, I do have some other thoughts that they probably wouldn't touch on. There's another piece that I have coming soon that involves, uh, Riley Smith, Mika Zibanejad, and Chris Kreider. It's a little bit different than what has already been put out there. So that's going to be there as well. But a lot of the stuff that I tend to write is nostalgia, time in the past, or just some moments that we all seem to remember, with the New York Rangers. And, you guys seem to like them. I also tie those in with my compilation videos. I just recently did a Michael Nylander compilation of most of his goals as a New York Ranger. It's weird. You would think that, a player who played in essentially this quote unquote modern era, you'd be able to find footage, but really you'd be surprised, if you remember how technology was in 2006 and 2007, it was still pretty primitive, in the sense of media. That everything was still on TV. It wasn't as widespread as it was now. And it's even crazy to think of how far we've gotten in terms of content over the last 20 something years. And I can't believe I'm old enough to actually say that now. But anyways, so if you want to check those out, they're on my YouTube channel. They're also, the corresponding pieces on the blog. Continue to support us. We got the Patreon supporters that, you guys, really help Dave out. And I'm sure he appreciates it, as we all do, and for those who are not part of the Patreon, who just come and check the website, who comment on the articles, who, converse with each other. Thank you for taking the time out to read. And also those who don't comment on the website, but also are on Twitter, or any of our other social platforms, thank you for checking our stuff out. I'm sure we're all appreciative of it. And obviously, it being in the summer, things are a little bit slow, but we're still finding the way to provide you with some stuff. So, anyways, this is producer JL just kind of rambling on about Martin St. Louis. But, um, if you have any Marty St. Louis memories, feel free to, comment on the post or, write to us on Twitter about it. I'll probably do a little bit more of these as the summer goes along if there's not really much news because, the summers are always kind of quiet. Maybe Lindgren and the team come together on arbitration. Maybe Capo Caco gets traded. Who knows? But this is producer JL signing off on this episode of Live from the Blue Seats. Be sure to catch us next week for another episode. What we'll talk about? Who knows? Maybe we might have some people, maybe we won't. But we'll figure it out. Anyways, thank you for listening. Check us out on all our social platforms. And let's go Rangers.